that she should do it for her baby. She refused. And then she said, I tried to comfort him, saying, it will all happen in the prisoner's dock as God's will, for you may be sure that we are not left to ourselves, but we are all in God's power. And then one day, when they were eating breakfast, they were hurried to the hearing. And she writes, we arrived at the forum, and straight away the story went about the neighborhood near the forum, and a huge crowd gathered. We walked up to the prisoner's dock. All the others, when questioned, admitted their guilt. Then, when it came my turn, my father appeared with my son, dragged me from the step, and said, perform the sacrifice. Have pity on your baby. Now, when the governor, a man named Hilarianus, saw this, he also urged her to recant her faith for the sake of her father and for the sake of her baby. He said, have pity on your father's gray head. Have pity on your infant son. Offer the sacrifice for the welfare of the emperor. And she refused. And then the governor asked her directly, are you a Christian? And she said, yes, I am. Then the governor passed sentence on all of those catechumens that were in the group. They were condemned to die by wild animals. And they were subjected to a variety of wild animals during this process. But they were taken back to the prison, waiting execution, and they were given what is essentially a last meal. And it turns out that the folks in town evidently were allowed to come to that event and to heckle them, at which they offered testimony to their faith, and during which time they were able to convince some people of the virtue of the faith. Now, we do learn in her diary about one of the catechumens dying in prison. We also learn about another woman, one of the slave women I mentioned. Her name was Felicitas. She was 8 months pregnant when she was arrested, and she gave birth to her daughter while she was in prison. And then it says, and one of the sisters brought her up as her own daughter. In other words, somebody in the church took her child and raised that infant. That's God parenting at a very different level. The day that they were to be executed, they were brought to the arena. Some of them were attacked by leopards. Some of them were attacked by bears. Felicitas and Perpetua were attacked by a mad heifer. And in the course of the event, they were tossed about by this crazed animal, and all of the Christians who were mauled by these animals were then brought to the center of the arena to be executed by a gladiator. And in the case of Perpetua, when they got ready to execute her and the gladiator stabbed her, he hit a bone, and so it didn't kill her. She reached up and took his hand and brought the sword to her throat to allow him to execute her. Now, all of this story, Perpetua's diary and the diary of the eyewitnesses, you can actually read the whole story online if you just Google Perpetua, and you will find it. It's about 15 pages single-spaced, and I think you'll find it very interesting. Now, as we think about this story, I want you to realize that, that not all Christians had to suffer martyrdom like Perpetua and her friends. In fact, I imagine quite a number of them, when they heard the governor was out to get them, took off for the hills. But those who were arrested and were confronted and asked to renounce their faith refused. And when I think of this, I think of the story of Peter in the courtyard denying Jesus. a little slave girl comes up and says, "You're one of those Galileans too." And Peter says, "Never heard of the man. Never heard of the man." The steadfastness of these martyrs is quite amazing. And if you put yourself in their place, I suspect that most of us would approach the governor who said, "Are you a Christian?" by saying something like, "I'm sure that we can come to some kind of accommodation that would make everybody happy." Or we'd find some way to speak weasel words, or we would rationalize our denial of Jesus for the sake of our father, our baby, or our family, or we would cross our fingers behind our back as we renounced our faith or some other thing. Now, the truth of our lives, my life and your life, is that we probably will never be asked to give up our life for our faith. But I do believe that we are asked to give up our anonymity for our faith. You know, we walk in the world and there's very little sign that we are Christian. At one time, people symbolized they were a Christian by wearing a cross, but that's become so common, it's just a piece of jewelry now, and people who are not Christian wear a cross. There's really only one day a year when there's visible evidence that we are Christians, and that's on Ash Wednesday. You walk around town and you see people with that little smudge of ashes on their forehead, and you know, maybe for the first time, that they are a Christian. But I believe that just as in the case of Perpetua, there are times when we need to say who we are. Remember that dialogue with her father? Saying, "This vase is a vase. I'm a Christian. I'm going to call myself what I am." There are times when we are called to be who we are, to let our light shine before the world. The word martyr actually comes from the Greek word that means simply a witness. And I believe that that's what we are called to be, witnesses, simply to tell who we are and what we have experienced in a way that shares the faith. And it does mean, in our case, while we may never have to suffer death, that we may have to give up something. Now, I worry that we're the kind of people that are reluctant even to sacrifice our comfort. But I believe we can draw inspiration from these saints. And there's something else in this story I wouldn't have you forget, and that is the strength of the fellowship that is reflected in Perpetua's diary. The deacons who bring her baby to her, the sister who takes Felicitas's infant daughter and raises her as her own, is an indication, and other places in the diary, Christians come and go and offer support. The mutual support which we offer to each other enables us to be witnesses, enables us to be strong enough to say who we are in the rest of the world. Now, this story is one I tell to you today and ask you to ponder the implications for us today. There are indeed places in our world even today where people are killed just because they are Christians. I have a friend who is recently retired as a United Methodist pastor. He served as an Air Force chaplain for over 20 years. And during the first Gulf War, he had to be spirited out of Saudi Arabia because he had taken a box of Bibles into the country. There are places today where Christians are still persecuted. And there are places and settings where Christianity is not popular. We may never be asked to give up our life, but we may endanger a promotion someday by expressing our Christian faith. We may, in fact, endanger our job by expressing our Christian faith in some circumstances, and certainly we have the capacity to alienate friends by offering our witness. The story of Perpetua and Felicitas, I hope, make a difference in our lives. You know, over these weeks, I want us to be looking in the rearview mirror, but with a purpose, so that we understand how we have to live as we move forward, as we look through the windshield. Ask yourself today, how would we behave differently? How would you behave differently or speak differently because you know their story? Their story is about how the call of God was on their lives and they responded. But the call of God is on our lives, and we are asked to respond as well. I'd like to finish by sharing with you some music that came from the contemporary service. I want you to listen carefully as Ron and Nancy share with us this song, to the words as we reflect on the meaning of these saints who've gone before us and God's call upon our life.